that's one factor. These incel guys that just can't find themselves getting into some kind of a relationship and having the satisfaction of that. Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was that way, and others. But Ray, and we're not going to get into the weeds here at all, but maybe in a future episode next season or the season after, I like to bring in some psychiatrist or certainly a pharmacologist, because I've been reading more and more studies about, what are some possible causal effects of these people, mostly men, sometimes women. We had Nashville, a trans woman. I'm still waiting for that manifesto, by the way, to be released. The shooter from in Walmart a couple of weeks ago, that's been released already, whatever he had on his phone. But the point is...
Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. How you doing, Fitz?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Ray, and hello, everyone.
Outstanding. Good to see you again, Fitz.
Ray, you always say we have a special guest tonight.
Yeah.
Who's our special guest tonight?
Jim, you are. And
and you are.
And I
there
am.
You go.
We're both special, right? That's why they call this special agents, I guess, right?
That's very special agents with us, too.
Very good. My mother called me special, too. I don't know if that was complimentary or something else. I'm not sure. But anyways, I would like to open up today about talking about the recent UNLV shooting, which is another all too common tragedy, Jim, where there seems to be a good amount of warning signs that the shooter exhibited. We're not going to mention his name. There's no need to mention his name, but we're going to try and help our listeners avoid becoming a victim in the future. I sit here and you get frustrated because you see these things happen over and over again. And every time it happens, there's a commonality to it, Jen, and it frustrates the hell out of me. And then, like other shootings, the lack of information that's shared with the public is just not right. It's just not right.
Yeah, we are starting to see some common denominators. It's almost always males. Males tend to commit their crimes, especially violent crimes, between like 15 and 30. That's the prime, your testosterone that's at its highest levels. But here we have a guy last week in UNLV, 67 years old, and a well-educated, PhD professor of business, something in the world of business, who, looking back at his life and what we know now, and that's only what's been in the media and what's been available online, essentially the psychological autopsy that's being conducted on him right now. And as you said, there were indicators there. There was leakage. There was behavior exhibited by this person. And then it just all exploded about 11:30 in the morning last week on the UNLV campus. And here is, these were targeted victims, other professors. I'm not 100% clear yet how well he knew these professors. He didn't go after students, seemingly. And, but of course, everyone there was victimized that day, and they will be for the rest of their lives. But I found it very interesting hearing students that he taught at East Carolina University earlier, 5, 10, even 15 years ago, and some of the commentary they had about him back then, and the sort of bizarre behavioral characteristics that he exhibited. Not necessarily violent, but he was clearly, we talked about this before, Ray, our psychologist friends come up with different categories of personalities of threat assessors and those with homicidal ideation. And that is, this guy was a grievance collector. And that is someone, of course, he remembers every single slight and misfortune he has suffered and knows just who to blame. Now, like the Unabomber, they could be representational targets, or sometimes like the Walmart shooter from back in late November in Chesapeake, Virginia, he went after specific colleagues who were talking in code around him. So again, there's always some sort of paranoid, delusional issue involving these people, and there's some other factors we can get into, but the common denominators are really getting closer together here. It's not necessarily demographic, meaning age or race. We have white people doing it, black people, Asian over the years, Cho at Virginia Tech, and but nonetheless, we're having some behavioral commonalities. And I know you are familiar with some of those also.
You know, Jim, um, and I say this when I'm interviewed on numerous TV and radio stations about some of these instances, and I always say that the person doesn't wake up. He didn't wake up that morning and say, "I think today I'm going to become a mass shooter or the next active shooter here in Las Vegas."
Oh, yeah.
And he had some sort of grievance here, and we're not really sure what that is, but we can surmise based on the fact that he mailed numerous letters to professors around the country that the FBI has since gone and talked to see if they knew this individual or gather intel on this individual. But you have to look, and we also look and we say, well, in that grievance, he has an ideation. He comes up with this idea of, for whatever how he's going to substantiate or cure his reasoning as it kind of goes around this. But he targets, that's what we call targeted violence. He targets the business department. That's where he goes to. So it tells me that that's his area of grievance, where he's got an issue with those individuals, whether, and they said he's applied for numerous jobs in numerous colleges around the Nevada area, and has not been able to obtain a job. And then when they did the search of his apartment, they immediately knew that he was having some financial difficulties, because when they approached the apartment door, there was an eviction notice on the door. So there's some things going on in his background. And when you look at some of the commonalities, you look at extreme anger. Well, anybody that does this has to be extremely angry. And of course, it's not his fault. He's externalizing and blaming everybody else around him for it. And he's telling his students, I remember those students that gave me those bad evaluations in class. I knew where they sat, and you wonder if he hadn't encountered the police outside of that building where the business department was located at, he may have headed over to the student union, where if he heads over to that student union, it's loaded with students that are outside enjoying the weather and inside eating and going in and out. Imagine, and they found him when they were able to remove some of the ammunition. He was loaded with over 150 rounds of ammunition. They found 9 magazines that were loaded. So imagine the damage this individual could have done, and he didn't do it. So you were right. He was paranoid. He had that paranoid ideation where he felt like he was being persecuted. He hated everybody. And then you think, well, is there something that's going on here? Well, he hasn't been able to get a job. So that's a problem. And then he has these delusions and this persecutory belief that he's being dominated by others, and everybody's looking down on him. So you're right. It's always, and I'm sure that this has been in the thought process, but like you, this is very unusual to have a man of this age do something like this. I agree with you.
Well, except ironically, the last person that age to do a mass shooting was in Las Vegas in 2017. I think he was a few years younger. And to this day, the cause of or the rationale behind his shooting has not been released to the public. The FBI said they have zero writing, zero information on him. Who knows if that's right or not? But backing up a little bit, it's interesting. I'm adjunct, and I at Penn West University, but I certainly have enough people around me in academia to walk our audience through a little bit. That, adjunct, you teach one course at a time, whatever, which is, if it works for someone, that's fine. This guy at East Carolina, he was actually you start out, I believe, as an assistant professor, and that's when you don't have tenure.
Right.
If you make tenure, that's your next step. then you're an associate professor.
Right.
And a lot of professors may make tenure, but the next step after that is full professor. And that's not always easy to make. But this guy, to his credit, was a tenured professor within the system at East Carolina University, a good school, no reason to question that. But somehow, after 16 years there, he decided it was time to exit stage right, moves to Las Vegas. It seems he was kind of fascinated with that town, all the tinsel and glitter, I guess, whatever. But then he couldn't get a job there again. And he took out whatever grievances he may have had with East Carolina University. It seems he wound up taking them out at on the professors at UNLV. I'm not sure again if he even knew these people or not, but he's had an interesting track record, tenured in one university, and he tries to get a job, even maybe adjunct somewhere, and he couldn't get hired. There clearly were some warning signs that some of these administrators saw when they were looking to hire him. He had a PhD. I'm not sure. His teaching style was apparently kind of bizarre. He'd start out every class with a story, and that in of itself is not a bad thing. Kind of bring the students into what maybe the lesson plan is of that day. But apparently there was a female student that sat in his front row, in the front row of a class, of a mostly male class. And he said out loud to her at East Carolina, he said, "Oh, you wear a low-cut top like that for the entire semester, and you're sure to get an A." And you don't say stuff like that in a class, of course. But she went and told the dean or someone at the school, and the next day, he's not teaching that class anymore. I'm not sure if that's why he left in 2017, but at some point, he was at least terminated from that particular class for making a very, very unprofessional and immoral and unethical statement, certainly from someone his age to a student. And just one other student from East Carolina University was interviewed in the last week. And Ray, this ties in to what you were saying earlier about the personality of this individual, including, of course, that grievance collector that he may have been. But this former student said, quote, he was a narcissist obsessed with being idolized for his intellectual capabilities. Okay. When I read that, I thought of someone who maybe this guy's also a Mensa, belongs to the Mensa Society, which is, I don't know, 150 degree IQ or above, something like that, or degrees.
Yeah. 150 degrees. He was probably up there, yeah.
Yeah, but several degrees, which reminded me of Kaczynski, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who also had a very high IQ, several years in college, but he wanted to, as a professor at Berkeley, but of course he quit. Took a few years to get himself organized, but then he started killing people with his bombs. This guy chose to do it different, up close and personal. And I'll end this little segment here before Ray. I just want to say thank God for the law enforcement officers present that day. The university police, who, there are real police officers. There are some schools around the country. They've been disarmed in the last few years. I wouldn't be surprised some of the schools where we heard testimony from the presidents in the last week. But these officers should be armed. They responded. They ran towards danger when everyone else was running away, and they took this guy out carefully and cleanly with no one else getting hurt. So again, hats off to the officers who did the job there.
I agree. And you talk about he had an elevated IQ, and you look at some of the top serial killers that America's ever had, and Ed Kemper. And we heard, our last guest talk about Ed Kemper and his high IQ, Ted Bundy. And you can go on and on with some of these individuals, and you look at them. But you're right. But I really want to talk about, I want to end as we finish talking about this UNLV, is how do you help yourself from becoming a victim? What can you do if you're ever caught up in one of these situations? And that's the problem, is that I think training should be mandatory for every student that goes into a university, that they have to sit for a course I'm not talking about a 40-hour course. So part of their orientation when they come to the university as new is how to survive an active shooter situation. And I'm going to tell you, because if you're in one of these situations and you ask yourself, once you're in it, what do I do? It's too late. You have to know what you're going to do when it happens, not what you're going to do if it happens. You need to be aware of what you're going to do. Are you going to fight this individual? Are you going to run from this individual? Are you going to hide? What are you going to do? What is your thought process? And are you prepared? And that's the big thing, is people don't think about that. And that's what people need to start thinking about. How can I survive? In other words, one of the biggest things, one of your best defense measures is your situational awareness. Be aware of what's going on around you. And when you see somebody like this, and you said students were interviewed from East Carolina, but they were years ago. They were 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So how relevant is that to this guy today? Somewhat. But what about his neighbors? What about other people he came in contact with every day? Do we believe that those people didn't pick anything up, or they just said, man, that guy's really weird, right? But they never picked anything up. And then you look at this guy and you say, well, how long do you think he planned? Well, we know about a year ago, he bought a gun legally. He had no prior criminal history, no prior mental illness, nothing like that. But he was able to purchase a gun. Now, at 60, he's 67 when this happened. So at 66, he purchases a weapon. Why are you purchasing a weapon at 66 years of age? Are you concerned about your safety? Are you concerned about your neighborhood? Those could all be legitimate reasons. Or are you really looking to plan something? And then you write these letters, and that takes time. So all these things are going on. And these professors that got these letters, what did they do with them? What did they do? Did they report it? You know, these are all questions, but for the victims, okay, and my heart goes out not only to the people that lost their lives and the people that were wounded here, but all of the students and faculty that were affected by this. And you're right, Jim, they're going to continue to be affected for years and years to come. And I don't know how to get past that. And the school needs to set something up where I'm sure they do have something set up. But, you know, this past summer, I had the opportunity to do a review of the UVA shooting, which was done by a student. And you look at some of the things, and I'm not really supposed to say a lot about it, but it's very similar to just about every other shooting that's kind of occurred across this country, and it continues to occur. And I beg our listeners, please prepare yourself. Ask yourself what you will do if you're ever involved in an active shooter situation. Not when it happens, but what you will do before it happens. It's just like going to a fight. If you're going to go get into a fight with somebody, do you wait till you get into the fight to figure out how you're going to fight the person? Or do you think about it before you go into it? So it's so important to prepare yourself. Just like you would prepare for anything else you do, this is something, because you never know. You know, here's the thing, and we add these different variables in here. What if you're somewhere in a restaurant or you're somewhere at a movie theater and this happens and you happen to be with your elderly parent or you have your small children with you? Did you think about those things? How would you protect them and protect yourself? These are all things. And this is just the way we live today. You have to think about these things. As terrible as it is to speak about, and Jim and I hate talking about this, but we were very concerned about you, our listeners, who could be potential victims if something like this were to happen to you. And there are ways that you can protect. You can't totally eliminate it, but you can create an advantage for you. And I think that's important.
We're going to come back to this, Ray, because I know we're going to promote season 3 a little bit coming up, because this is our last episode of season 2. But before we leave the concept of of this mass shooting in UNLV and other ones we've referenced here. And I've said this before, but because it's applicable to all of these shootings, there seems to be an involuntary celibacy aspect to this latest one here. This guy seemed to have been frustrated with women and even making inappropriate comments to his female students. And I don't think he was married. He wrote something about I think it was I may be getting confused with some other shooter who didn't have a wife. But it seems these guys, the one in Virginia and Chesapeake in late November, but that's one factor. These incel guys that just can't find themselves getting into some kind of a relationship and having the satisfaction of that. Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was that way, and others. But Ray, and we're not going to get into the weeds here at all, but maybe in a future episode next season or the season after, I like to bring in some psychiatrist or certainly a pharmacologist, because I've been reading more and more studies about, what are some possible causal effects of these people, mostly men, sometimes women. We had Nashville, a trans woman. I'm still waiting for that manifesto, by the way, to be released. The shooter from in Walmart a couple of weeks ago, that's been released already, whatever he had on his phone. But the point is, in these autopsies, I want to get more information about their toxicological makeup. And there are enough studies being done that the constant use of marijuana, especially if started in the teens, can kind of screw up the brain. I'm not talking about the adult male once or twice a week, lights up a joint, whatever. But people that smoke it every day, in and out, not only do they have suicidal tendencies, but sometimes violent. And also the use of SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, basically the antidepressants. There's been studies about those too, that people have been on those. And even if you've been off them for 12 weeks, is at least one study came out. It was actually a longitudinal study for 50 years in the UK, studying people. That was mostly for pot smoking, but other studies too had a long time span in them. And I'm not floating out here officially that incessant pot smoking, or being on antidepressants are causing these types of violent actions. But I really think the government or some university, some task force, think tank, whatever, should really start analyzing these shooters and try to find out some of these physiological, if not toxicological, common denominators. And I know with big pharma and now the big pot business, there's going to be some kickback or blowback, maybe both, trying to suppress this information. But those of us and everyday citizens getting mowed down in these shootings, it's one thing to complain about the guns, but are we over drugging people even with legal prescribed drugs, and that's causing this sort of bizarre behavior? Not on everyone, of course, and the numbers are very small. But what kind of factors do we have here? We discuss demographics, age, happiness, unhappiness, whatever indicators beforehand, leakage. But let's start looking at their blood work and find out what kind of drugs they've been taking, legal or illegal, for how many years. And let's see what kind of common denominator we can come up with then. And the most important thing is then for existing family members, relatives, loved ones, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, they know that their loved one has been on these drugs for these years. And they're also showing this other aberrant behavior that you were describing earlier. Then it's time to perhaps get authorities involved and get some kind of a mandatory psych eval, which should work. It didn't seem to work in Maine about a month and a half ago. Even though he was in for 2 to 3 weeks, he got out and still shut up 2 different bars and a bowling alley. So ending this part, Ray, there's a lot more, I think, law enforcement tied in with the medical community, tied in with the CDC can do to really do a deep dig on these mass and spree killers of the last decade or two. And I'll bet you some of the factors we brought up are going to be there, be pretty obvious. And that's a much better way of possibly identifying the next person who's going to do this. And Ray, he may be listening or watching us right now. And I'm sure he's following what this guy did in Vegas to try to make himself even better the next time. Let's try to identify these people before they do it, though.
Jim.
And I think there are ways to do that.
I think it's a really worthwhile study that someone should do. But I will say this, in that some of the research I've done, and this goes up through from 2000, probably up through 2016 when I was doing my dissertation, which was on this, that probably 96+% of individuals involved in these situations at the time of the event were not under the influence of either drugs and or alcohol.
I get that.
But that doesn't mean that there's not a history of abuse there.
And their brain cells are twisted.
Exactly. So that's what I can tell you, that part. But the other part that you talk about, I don't know if there's anything out there about that. And I think that's a really worthwhile reason to take a look at this to see if that's one of the cause and effects of this thing. I think it is. I think it's a good thing.
And we'll come back to this topic in season 3.
We're going to season 3. Jim and I have been talking, and we really want to gear towards. Now, I'm not saying our whole season 3 is going to entail victims, and we don't like to call them victims, but we call them survivors. But a lot of people out there don't really know what a victim is or know what a survivor is. Is there a difference? But we plan on hopefully bringing some people in who have been victims of abuse or abuse victims of things like domestic violence, stalking, elder abuse, cyber stalking, child abuse, and even rape. But not only that, is we're also going to try and bring some of these offenders in that committed some of these atrocities against their abuse victims. But a lot of these people, believe it or not, are actually, and when you talk about victimology, and Jana Monroe, we talked to our last guest, she talked about victimology. But do you really know what the types of crime victims that are out there? And people really don't know that. And there's actually 3 types. There's your primary victim. There's your secondary victim that experiences the crime secondhand, such as intimate partners or significant others of rape victims, or even children of battered women. Then there's their tertiary crime victims. They experience harm, and most of us do this through media accounts or watching TV. We experience that victimization there too. So when we look at, from our perspective, and Jim and I, when we look at this, anytime there's a crime that we've been asked to take a look at, in every violent crime that occurs, and let's be perfectly let it be perfectly understood here that the areas of abuse that I talked about are all violent crimes. Okay? And we always ask was there a relationship between the victim and the offender? And what was it? We always ask, what was the victim's risk level? And we talk about, did the victim participate in their victimization? And a lot of people go, no way, how could that possibly be? A victim would never participate in their victimization. Who wants to be victimized? Well, when's the last time you pulled into to get a cup of coffee in the morning when it's 10 degrees outside and there's cars running outside with nobody in them? When's the last time you left your car unlocked out in front of your home because you think you live in a safe neighborhood? All these type of things, did you participate in your victimization? How about if you have a drug problem and you go buy drugs? Do you elevate your risk because you go buy drugs? So we asked ourselves questions about that. So what we're trying to understand in this victim selection process is, we're trying to understand that. Why was the victim, or why was this person chosen to be a victim of a crime at this particular point in time? We're trying to look at the interaction between the victim and the offender too. We're trying to look at that. it helps us to focus on the investigation and helps us to reconstruct the crime itself. So these are all things when we talk about victims, and when we bring in some of these guests next week, and it's not going to be totally full, but we're going to try to bring in as many as we can and then mix some other things in there with it. But we're really looking to kind of dedicate our season 3 to victims and survivors. Jim, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we both talked offline about some bad guys we know and survivors that we know. And of course, we opened season 2 with Dee McDonald from Australia and hearing her story. So I think we can find some other survivors like her, or maybe different types of crimes, and we can and it could be primary, secondary, or tertiary, and talk to those folks and help give other people out there, as you said, an opportunity to learn the best way to avoid becoming a victim or a survivor. Or if you're going to survive just everyday life that we all put up with, not a violent crime. And there are ways to do the best to minimize putting yourself in those situations. And we'll work through that in season 3. And I think by the end of it, our audience will know a lot more about how to keep safe.
I agree, Jim. I agree. Lastly, we've been posting all of our Code Red on social media outlets, and we've asked you to submit questions. And under the title of Ask an FBI Agent and Get a Frank Response. And believe it or not, we've been overwhelmed with questions. So what we thought we would start doing as we get through this is we're going to choose a few questions at random. And I think this will let you know. And Jim and I are kind of throwing around about maybe a live show down the road where you can actually come on and kind of talk to us, do a phone in. Like you can actually talk and we can kind of talk right over this and make it live. But anyways, I want to get into these questions, and I'll tell you what, I'm amazed at the clarity and the just great questions. I mean, I think they're fantastic. I was really blown away. This first question comes from Leah out of Dearborn, Michigan. Leah writes, I'm a big fan of the X-Files TV series. Were there ever any unexplained paranormal cases that you or your colleagues came across in your career that you would be willing to share with us? Jim?
Well, I can tell you this anecdote. When I first got to the profiling unit in 1995, X-Files was really big on TV. And one of the senior profilers showed me this kind of cool sign they made up. It wasn't just handwritten. They somehow had it made on plastic, which I guess they could do with the Academy. And 3 simple words: alien autopsy room. And every once in a while, when they were bringing guests in, when they were bringing even new profilers, although they didn't do this with me, but even journalists, they would walk them through the different corridors. And, this is where we analyze these kind of cases. This is so-and-so's office. And they wouldn't even say anything, but they would have previously put the sign up, alien autopsy room, and just walk right by. And I've been told a few times there'd been a reporter with like a cameraman behind her, and she'd grab him and get that picture. And of course, they'd open it up. It's a broom closet. So I don't think I've ever actually, as a regular investigator or profiler, had a case that involved the paranormal. As a police officer, I used to patrol an area in Bensalem Township called Penryn. There was an old Revolutionary War mansion there, and they said every Christmas Eve there'd be a headless guy walking around, like at 1 or 2 in the morning, actually Christmas morning. I never actually worked those shifts or that into Christmas morning, and I did go there once, cold winter night, December 25th, about 3 a.m., and I heard some strange noise in the woods, And I had a gun on my in my holster. I had a shotgun next to me in front of the passenger seat, and I heard some strange noises. And I said, you know what? I'm out of here. So I never did see the headless person, but I didn't go back looking for him either. So I have no direct connections to a paranormal investigation. Ray, how about you?
I came close, but spirits and ghosts, nothing of that nature. But I can tell you this: before I got on the job, I was with a buddy of mine who I played college football with, and we were out in the Chambersburg area where he lived, and we were coming back from a bar. Now, we hadn't really had a
That's
whole lot to
Pennsylvania,
drink.
by the way, right?
This is Pennsylvania, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Harrisburg. We haven't had a whole lot to drink, but we're coming, and it's on a back road, and we're the only ones, and we seen this green orb come down and go. There's a lot of these mountains or hills out in Pennsylvania, and it went down behind a mountain. And I've never really told anybody this before, but we looked at each other and we said, I said, did you see that? And he says, yeah, I did. And he said, did you see it? And I said, yeah. And I said, look, we can never, I don't know what the hell that was, but I'm never going to mention anything about it again, and we didn't, unless we see each other once in a while. We get together about every couple of months for lunch and we still talk about it. But here's something that happened to me when I was on the bank robbery squad in Philadelphia. There is a young boy named Mark Heinbach who came up missing in Cape May, New Jersey. And this was 1992, I think, 1992, 1993. And the Jersey State Police was the lead agency on it. And they were looking for this kid and sending leads out. Well, what happens is we get a call in from an individual who says they have information on this disappearance of this young boy. And this person lives, and I'm not going to mention who it is, but they live in Philadelphia, and they're supposed to be a psychic. So I go up as the supervisor says, hey, you need to go up and talk. I was one of the younger guys on the squad. So guess what? The younger guys on the squad, you're going to go up and talk to this lady, you and this other young buck. Take the young person with you, who was even younger than me. She had about maybe 2 years on. I was about 4 years on, maybe 5. And so we go up, and he says, oh, on the way up, he says, show her this photo too. See, no, he didn't say show it to her. He says, on the way back, stop in West Philly, there's a 3-year-old young boy that came up missing up in West Philadelphia. See if we can offer any assistance. Now, at that time, the FBI did not get involved in missing children because it had to go interstate. So there was nothing that we were involved in, not like it is today with NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or, it was after the John Walsh case where his son was kidnapped and killed down in Florida, that there was a thing passed by Congress that the FBI would get involved at the very beginning of these things. So we were just an ancillary type of unit that would help in any way that we could. We were offering our resources. So I went out, and this psychic, who I knew nothing about, but she told me, she said, the young boy in Cape May, New Jersey is dead. I believe it's a family member. I believe it's his uncle or someone that's close to him that did this, which is a good possibility, because anytime we look at something that happens to a family member, we always look at the family first. So I says, oh, okay. I says, but she couldn't offer me anything more. So she says to me, I says, what the hell? And I said, hey, can you tell me anything about this little kid? And she says, oh, sorry. She says, he's dead. And I says, oh. So I said, okay. And I'm getting ready to leave. She goes, she says, I see a freezer and I see some discolored water and some pipes. I said, okay. I said, well, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot. We'll let you know if anything comes up. So I gave her my card. So I leave and I go to West Philadelphia with this young agent, female agent, and we go down and I talk to the sergeant. They have a command post set up outside. They get a trap and trace on the phone because they think the kid was a foster child in West Philadelphia, and this was a foster mother. She had both the brother and the sister. They were trying to keep them together. And so the sergeant says, "Come on, take you a walk in and show you around what happened." And there was a couple of people sitting in the kitchen. It was a row home. And I asked him, I said, he showed me upstairs where the child was sleeping the last time she saw him. And I said, "Did you go through the house and look in all the nooks and crannies?" He says, "Yep, we've been through the whole place." And I says, "Do they have a basement? Is it walking?" He goes, "Yep, it's a basement down there. It's functional." So we go downstairs, and what do I see? I see a freezer.
I guess
And
that
I says, "Hey, did you guys look in this?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "Do you mind if I take a look?" And he says, "No, no." So I open it up. I move some things around, and there's the torso of the young boy. And I went, "Hey, Sarge, you better take a look at this." And then they called the crime scene in, and it was pretty devastating. It was a young child, and she's the one that killed the young child. And then so she could get him, she wanted to put him in a suitcase and get rid of him, but she wasn't able to do that because she killed him the night before, and time had passed by. And there's a thing called rigor mortis that sets in where the body becomes very, very stringent, or it doesn't bend. And then after 24 hours or 18 to 24 hours, it kind of collapses again. You're able to move the body. And that's what happened. So she cut off the legs and the arms of the young boy and put them in a suitcase up in the back of the basement. And it was something I'll never forget. That's about as close as I came to the paranoid talking to that psychic. Needless to say, that psychic and I still talk to this day. So that's 30 years later, and we still talk. So she's a little bit older now.
I hope she doesn't come anywhere near any refrigerators or freezers of yours.
No, she does not. She does not.
Okay.
I mean, I talk to her from time to time, but she called me that next day and said, I told you. And I thought, maybe I should send this information down to the Jersey State Police about the uncle, which I did anyways. But anyways, so that, Leah, is from Dearborn, Michigan. That is my story and Jim's story about paranormal. So let's go to another question. This one comes from Quentin out of Kansas City, Missouri. Quentin asked a separate question for both Fitz and I. The first one is going to be to Fitz. He says, "Fitz, what is the first thing that you notice when you look at a new document?"
Good question. Quentin, right?
Yes, Quentin.
When I look at a document, I don't look at it to read what was actually written. That's what we do every day when we read something. We want to comprehend. I look at it for individual features and indicators of authorship that are uncommon. So right away, my focus is on spelling. It is on punctuation. It is on noun phrases, verb phrases, the formatting, how it's marginated. And I try to get a snapshot in my head of the consistency of a particular document which I'm assessing. And then I get my colored markers out, and I did, orange, red, yellow. They all mean different things to me, and that's how I look at a document. I sit down and read the newspaper, or I go online and read something. Of course, I'm reading for comprehension purposes. But if someone says, "Hey, here's a case to work. Here what I want you to read," and I will look at it sort of in a holistic way, not for meaning, but for features that are idiosyncratic, unusual, every once in a while unique. Remember, unique literally means one of a kind. And I've had a few cases about those. So, so it's a holistic approach. Of course, it may be multiple documents. It may be the Q question communications I'm looking at, as well as the K. And I'm doing the same thing. So I'm almost taking a mental snapshot, and I can pick apart in my brain. Even later on, I'm lucky my brain sort of works that way, and look for all the individual pieces in there. But ultimately, I will go back maybe the third or fourth time, read that same document for comprehension purposes to see what the person is actually trying to say. But I'm not on the scene of a kidnapping where give us $100,000 by 10 tomorrow, and or we'll kill the child. So obviously, you're looking at that for comprehension to meet the basic needs from an investigative perspective. But if I'm doing an analysis, kind of once or twice removed from the scene, how I explained it is what exactly I would do. So good question. And I don't do that on an everyday basis. I only do it when someone's asked me to look at a one or more documents for some sort of an analysis, profile, or threat assessment. Ray, I'm curious to hear the question you were asked.
Well, it says Ray. Quentin asked me, Quentin from Kansas City, Missouri, he says, Ray, how do you go about choosing which cold case or innocent project to work on among the many that you do? Great question, Quentin. So you should be aware, you're from Michigan, Dearborn. I'm working with a professor out of Western Michigan, just developed a cold case investigation course that I'm offering at the university that begins in January. I'm going to supplement that in September with an internship for students. We'll start it out small that are going to actually look at cold cases and work with actually cold case detectives to help and solve that. Now, they're not going to do interviews. They're not going to do those things. But what they're going to do is they're going to organize the evidence. They're going to digitize it and then help analyze, looking at different things and conducting work that the detectives might need them to do, like family trees, old addresses, who lived at different places and things of that nature. What do we look at? There's a solvability index or matrix that we look at, and we give points to different things. And what we do is we look at evidence. Is there evidence? Well, it depends how old it is. Is there evidence? Is there things that we could use? Fingerprints? Is there trace evidence that we could pull DNA from? Because remember, some of these cold cases, some of the things that are available today were not available when those crimes were committed back then. So the biggest thing is evidence. What evidence do we have? What about the victim? Have we identified the victim? Do we know that there is a victim? Do we have a body? And if we do, have we done the victimology as it relates to it? Then we look about and we say, is there any informants? The greatest thing about any crime is that there's always somebody else that knows what happened. Always, almost always. And I see, Jim, maybe you look at some serial offenders that they kind of keep to themselves, but eventually they find out, because when you do something that's so much they want to put out there. So then you have to look at the quality of that stuff. So then we look at witnesses. Are they still alive, these witnesses? Or are they dead? We look at the suspect. Are they still alive? Has the suspect been developed? What have they done with that suspect? And then we want to look at some case documents. Do they have all the reports necessary? Or is there information that we need to put out there? Physical evidence documents. What about photographs? What are crime scene photographs, ME reports? We're looking at technical. Now you say, we look at social media records. And we say, well, this thing happened in 1980, this case. So there are no social media records. Has there been anything said since then? You look at that, grand jury testimony. You look at all that, and then you kind of add all these points up and you say, what's the probability of this being solved? If you get a score under 40, the probability of that being solved is not going to be that great. The higher the scores, it comes close to 100, the better the chance of the case being solved. So that's what we kind of look at when we do these things, because you want, just like these cases, they go cold after a couple weeks. It's the same thing when you look at these cases. You want to make sure that you're going to give or assign your resources to the cases that have the best chance of being solved. Not for us, but for the families. We don't want to give anybody false hope, but we will take a look at every single case and put it through this solvability matrix. And police departments do that as well. So that's why it's important when you have a case that's 30, 40, 20 years old. I mean, there's a lot of things that change over time. Sometimes when you can't solve something, you sit back and say, let me wait till technology catches up so that can help us with that. Now, I hope that answers your question, Quentin, but Quentin has a second question for us. And he says, Quentin asks, Ray and Fitz, do you do private consulting? And if so, how can we find you? And the answer to that is yes, we do. Jim and I do it together, and we do it separately. We're so much better together. And how you can find us is I'll give you an email that you can reach out to me. And if you're ready, It's rjc420 at comcast.net. Now, that's my personal one, but you can also, I have a raymondcarr.com, my website. You can get in touch with me from there as well. Jim?
Yeah, I think it's just simple. My website is jamesrfitzgerald.com. Contact information is there. And yes, I do work cases involving behavioral assessments, forensic linguistics, threat assessment. So drop me a line and we'll see what we can do.
Thanks for the question, Quentin. And the last question we're going to touch on today comes from Elizabeth in San Diego, California. Elizabeth writes, this is for both of us, all right? She says, Ray and Fitz, want to know what your opinion is. What are the two most common denominators among serial killers? Jim, I'll let you take the first stab.
Well, I'm going to start with three common denominators that back in the 1980s, some of the founding members of the FBI's profiling unit, John Douglas, Bob Ressler, and others, did exhaustive studies of serial killers. And the three most common factors of those individuals, confirmed serial killers, convicted in prison, and of course, who were willing to do these interviews, or at least we had good information about them from others. Those three factors from their childhood, which were significantly alike, that they could perhaps be a correlation to some degree in terms of future violent behavior, were these three things: animal cruelty, arson setting, and urinaceus, which is actually bedwetting. So of those earlier serial killers studied, if they tortured little animals in their youth, if they set fires to the sheds of the neighbors' houses or the house themselves, and also weirdly, if they were bedwetters, which psychologists have studied. Of course, little kids do it into their 10 or 12 years old, no big deal there. But if it goes much farther than that, sometimes it's like a sign of rebellion or being upset at someone in their household. So they were the three factors for many years. There's been some debate in more recent times how significant they are. But if you're torturing little animals as a kid, you're probably going to torture, spouses or children when you're older. That doesn't necessarily stop. I don't mean one time with a magnifying glass over, the anthill, but I'm talking about the neighbor's cats and catching squirrels and doing some nasty things to them, which these guys had done. Nowadays, and I talked about this earlier, and I've talked about it in other episodes, if there's one primary characteristic of these mass and serial killers, if not spree killers, it's that of incel, involuntary celibacy. There's a lot of guys out there just hung up on not being able to date or getting relationships as they would like. They perhaps bring their own personality disorders to the dating field, and the women just don't really care to hook up with them. And with other factors kicking in, again, it's always a soup of some sort from a mental health perspective. They then act accordingly, throw in drugs of some sort, legal, illegal, and it could be a recipe for catastrophe. So there's three factors from research earlier that I believe still holds water, and here's some from more present times, the incel and the drug abuse that we talked about before, which I think are relatively good predictors of violent ideology. Right?
I totally agree with Jim on that. One of the things that I've seen in looking at a lot of these offenders is their attention to detail, their organization. I find them to be highly organized in committing their offenses, where there's a great deal of planning, as well as not so much in victim selection, but in planning. Most of the victims that serial killers engage in are victims of opportunity. They usually do not know they're victims, which makes it easier to do what they do. I see a higher degree of intelligence, not with all, but with some of these individuals. I see them being very highly intelligent. And like Jim said, if you go back into the history of these individuals, you're going to find things that will kind of earmark, and you'll say, now I see why this individual acted in the way that they acted based upon past behavior. Because we all know the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And that really is what a lot of these individuals espouse to. Someone like Ed Kemper, he was involved. And I talk about Ed Kemper because he's a case study that I use in one of my courses, in a violent crime course, because he's so interesting. Like in actuality, when the first kill that he did outside of his grandparents, he killed a woman, and he got blood on the clothes that he was wearing. And he said at that point that was the initiation. And from that point forward, he wore those same clothes every time he went out to kill. So they're very ritualistic in what they do, which is not something that is needed to commit the crime, but they do it because of some psychological or physiological need that they have on their behalf. So there's a lot of commonalities when you look at it, but just to name a few, those are some of the ones that kind of hit to me.
And obviously, a dysfunctional family growing up where there's been beatings and violence within, traditionally by the father. If a young man, a boy, is going to be beaten by his father, and perhaps others, mothers, boyfriends, things like that, uncles, he's going to resort to that as his coping mechanism with his own family members or perhaps strangers. So, I think these factors that we just elaborated upon paint a pretty clear picture of most serial offenders and even others out there with violent ideology.
Well, with that said, Jim, that
Can I
was
make
our last question. Yep.
I want to do a shout out.
Well, I just want to, just before you go to that shout out, I just want to thank Elizabeth, Quentin, and Leah for your questions. I thought they were fantastic. It really makes us think. And if you have other questions, we're going to start doing this all the time. So if you have other questions, please put those questions out there. We'd love to answer them. And I think it'd be great if we get a chance to talk to you in person. I think that would be great. And we're going to try and set that up for you, hopefully sometime in season 3.
Well, while you're thanking people, let's thank Matt McLaughlin and Matt Robinson, our producers.
Absolutely.
And perhaps they would be the ones that help us coordinate and facilitate this live thing. No, but real quick here at the very end, ever since my Unabomb days, I was always fascinated how Ted Kaczynski, speaking of smart criminals, again, the Unabomber, he taught himself Spanish. And he never traveled to a Spanish country. He never took a Spanish class anywhere. He bought some dictionaries, some grammar books, and when we went into his cabin, he had dozens of Spanish written documents, and some that we eventually got off other people that he mailed to. Well, lo and behold, and again, backing up a little bit, as a professor at Penn West University, I donated all my Unabomb papers there about 2 years or so ago. And now there's an archive that anyone can look up all the Unabomb's papers up to the time of his arrest. And of course, all the documents, the 1,000 documents found inside his cabin. And I was always fascinated by the Spanish documents. We had them translated. Why did he write them in Spanish? How could he teach himself a whole foreign language without ever having lived in the community? And but bottom line is, someone else had that curiosity, and he wrote a book. Jorge Roger. I'm not going to try to pronounce the middle name, but it's all in Spanish. I remember that bookshelf. You got that picture there online, but I actually walked through the cabin and saw his books lined up like that. And so he mentions being here a few times. He thanks me for the Penn West archive. So I just want to give him a shout out. If you speak Spanish, if you read Spanish, you may want to consider picking up this book. So I'm glad he sent me a nice signed copy with a few nice words in there about me. So whenever I see a book in which I feel it captures a case well, or a niche of a case in which I may have been involved, I like to share it with our with our audience here. And I think this, again, is one of them if you happen to speak Spanish or you're living in Spain or Mexico. I know Cold Red is all over the place now, Ray, right? So
It is.
maybe they understand English that they can listen to us, but they also, it may be their native tongue. So if you
Well,
want to
I'd
get a
like to
good
know.
outline on that, check
Yeah.
out that book.
Tell me, how do they say James in Spanish?
Jaime. J's are not pronounced in Spanish.
Jaime?
So it'd be Jaime.
Heine?
Jaime.
It sounds like Heine. Is it Heine or what is it?
You know, Ray, you are obviously monolingual.
Monolingual.
Because
Yeah, okay. Is that one of the linguistic things here, Jimbo?
Yeah, something like that. But Muy Bien Libro, very good book.
Right.
Check it out. Unabomber La España Eterna. So check it
I'll
out.
wait for the first question that comes in. It says, I have a question for Jim and Heine.
It's Jaime.
Oh,
Jaime, but the J
Heine.
is silent.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
I wasn't hearing it right. Sorry, Jim.
Dr.
All right,
Ray, Dr. Ray can barely understand the most basic aspects of a
My bad, Jim.
of a romance language.
Jim, take us home, will you, please?
I will. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out through season 2 and certainly tonight's episode. Be sure to follow us on all the social media sites. Subscribe to us also on YouTube, anywhere you can. And, of course, check us out at coldredpodcast.com.